Hello everybody, today I'm going to go over a few basics in Photoshop from a friend of mine who's just learning. Let's jump right in. First and foremost I'm going to go over my brushes, which are, I tend to use a few ones pretty basically. The first one is a big fuzzy one that you can see is pressure sensitive and really just has a myriad of purposes, whether darkening larger areas or softly adding detail to areas that, sharpening up edges like I'm doing right now, that don't need to be, exactly, crazy sharp. Then I have what I call the fine line brush, which I use primarily for doing sort of pen work. The brush itself is essentially like a hard round brush, but as you can see at the ends, there's a little bit of pressure sensitivity to it. And this one, like I said, I tend to use for doing really just hard edges. If I wanted to make this nice and hard, it's helpful to have there. But if I want to do those fine detail work too, for cutting out stuff and for adding general textures and whatnot, that helps there. Let's see. Next up is what I call the blur brush, which I'm actually gonna not show because it's a invention of mine that yeah. Anyway, the next one is called I call it Sketchwork Small, and this one is the one I primarily use for sketchwork. It's got a little bit of pressure sensitivity, which adjusts. If we look in the panel, we've got shape dynamics that have pen that's controlled by pen pressure, but also the transfer is adjusted by pen pressure. But there's minimums, as you can see, for each of them. So it's not like a complete down to nothing. It more, I guess, accurately mimics like a Prismacolor marker. And as such, it's then really good for sketching things out really quickly and so on and so forth. The next one I call Arabesque, which is, you know, it's actually not. I didn't make it. It comes with Photoshop. It's really just. Let's have a look. It's a shape dynamic with pen pressure with no minimum diameter, and that's about it. Just has some smoothing on it. This one is really just for for making things pretty. Um, or not pretty, but where's my layers? Really just making things nice, but that's beyond the point. Anyway, I'm sure you can figure out what that's for. Finally, there's a hard round, which is honestly just like the fine line brush. It's just a little bit bigger. And then I have some other ones. This is actually one of my favorites. It is as you can see, it's basically just a squashed oval, it has angle sensitivity. So if my pen is essentially going up and down, but if I move it horizontally, it changes that stuff, and it's obviously pressure sensitive. But this is surprisingly good for doing edge work really small. Like if I wanted to put some lines in, um, I can get really kind of nice sharp lines here and there. And it's also very good for shading, because if I drop down the opacity a little bit, as you can see, it has a sort of almost sculptural effect, like as though I were using some kind of tool. So those are all pretty decent, pretty decent little brushes. I have a ton of other ones. I have a square, transparent one, which is nice and helpful, and then a hex, which is also very good. I don't know why it just feels right to me. And finally, a triangle. I've got really just tons and tons and tons and tons of other brushes, but they're all not really. I don't use them on the regular, with the exception of I guess this one is called Poop Splats, um, which is good for doing trees and brush and that kind of stuff and painterly things. And there's a bunch of other ones there. Really, we're not gonna go too heavily into that today, because today is a little bit more basic. So, first thing I kind of wanted to look into was, or go over was how I tend to take drawn line work, and then move that into Photoshop and use it appropriately. So here I've got some old sketch work, and this is, of course, your raw scan here. And really quick on scanning things in, um, once you've got it, you've got a whole bunch of line work, which looks really clear in pencil, but not so much on the computer. And the way to fix that is if we select it, and then I'm copying it, and then I'll bring it into what I'm working on and pasting. We can first adjust levels, which is Control L, or if that doesn't work for you, image adjustments, levels here. And what levels is well, I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially it's a way of adjusting contrast in a manual way. And as you can see, as I move the black slider upwards, it makes the blacks blacker. I think it has something to do with the percentages on the screen of that particular shade or hue. And so then, you know, as you can see in this sketch I have here, there's both painting, or not painting, but pen work and also pencil work. So if I take this and I wanted to put it right next to it, let me close that. Well, never mind. Then we can make sure that both of these drawings here are roughly at the same contrast level. Wow, no. There we go. Fucking, I'm not trying to, wow, something's fucked up. Anyway, so, you know, basic cleanup, use the eraser tool, getting rid of anything that doesn't need to be there. And then again, with this one, we can adjust the levels until roughly they match. And with the pen is an interesting one. You've got all these sketch marks beneath, and levels is a great way to get rid of those, because if you drop the white slider down, it increases the amount of white in the image, and as you can see, completely eliminates all those sketch marks there. So, especially if you're using some kind of blue pen or pencil beneath it, it's helpful. Now, there's a few different ways that people tend to go about like painting underneath these things. The first and foremost and easiest is to go to, under your layers palette, go to change it to multiply, which what it'll do is it'll just make it so that all the darks will be translated beneath, but anything light won't. So if we go to a color, like, I don't know, let's say red, and we draw, then as you can see, it's like you're painting underneath it, and only the blacks are being translated. The only problem I have with this is that if you have, I don't know, if you have like a series of colors beneath it, and eventually, you know, you've got it down, maybe you've got your drawing kind of shaded nicely underneath, and you're setting up the volumes or whatever, and you want to get rid of these lines, you're kind of restricted into two different ways, like two different sort of options. The first option is to paint like directly over them in a new layer, like this. You change your layer to, here's our layers here. Here's the line work layer. Let's just call that line work. And you can paint over top of it, which is, you know, kind of tiresome for me, because then it's a lot more redrawing that you have to do. Or, you know, the other option is to simply erase it when you're done with it. But that leaves, as you can see, like right here, there's a whole bunch of these sort of little marks where the underpainting doesn't quite fit it exactly. So that's like, it's a mediocre way, in my opinion, of doing it. The better, more correct way, and it's a little bit more time intensive, but it'll save you a lot of time in the long run, is to change it into a quick mask layer and use the blacks and the whites as a selector. So what that means is you select your whole canvas, or the area, the line work, and you copy it. In this case, I'm using Shift Control C, which will do, that's not what I wanted. I think it just copies everything that's on the screen for me. So I copy that, and then I'll go down to here to this little square underneath your color selector, and this is the quick mask selector. It'll say edit in quick mask mode. When you're here, what this does is it sets up this space. Like, I didn't choose red, but if you go to white, you notice our colors are switching right here. I'm using X to do that, by the way. The white will put a negative, and so when we leave quick mask mode after doing whatever we want, the red will be the unselected part and the white will be the selected part. So if we paint again, as you can see what we just had there, you know, comes through. It's actually a very useful thing. It is very useful, not actually, it is very useful. But if we go into the quick mask mode again, the same sort of rules apply in general with the exception of color. So if you paste what you selected earlier, which is the black and white line work, you'll notice things have gone red. And then what you do is you invert, which is Control I in my case, or image, I think, invert right here. Then what'll happen is when you exit quick mask mode, you're left only with the black as the selection. So if we turn off the line work layer, we can see that what's selected is what the line work was. So then we make a new layer, which I use Control Shift N as the hotkey, and then we use the gradient or the paint bucket tool here to fill, then deselect. Then we're left with the same line work as before. Compare the two, they're pretty much identical. But the better part is there's no white at all in this layer. So here's what's powerful about that. So let's say we have on the underneath layer we have a blue, and that looks pretty good. See, it automatically does the thing that the multiply does, but even better if we go into this layer and lock the transparency of the layer, which is up here, then we can paint on top of that layer and change the line work itself. Now, this has a lot of implications. First and foremost, that's cool or whatever, but again, if we wanted to use the line work to our advantage, let's say to highlight the edge, or like a rim light, if like this is being shined on from here, then yeah, so let's just quick mock it up. So we'll shade it in as though it were a thing. Real quick, just light and stupid. And then we wanted to make this edge here really pop, then we go to that layer with the lock transparency still and just paint it. And as you can see, it preserves the line work and puts it to work for us, as opposed to simply having to repaint the line work and all that. And I think this is really helpful, because again, if you use the multiply layer, you can't really paint over it. Like again, if we go back to the original line work, set this to multiply again, and then lock the transparency and start trying to do the same thing, it won't work, because if we do anything other than white as a brush, it'll apply the multiply effect to anything below it. So again, if we want to lighten up this edge with white, which I'm using here, then it'll just erase it, essentially. So that's why the multiply layer technique isn't really my preference, and again, you end up with a better option here if you use, the line work alone. Yeah, so that's pretty much it as far as that is concerned. I'm going to be making a few more of these as time goes on. Subscribe for more if you want. Thanks. Bye.